There is a silence that exists not in the absence of sound, but in the space between thoughts. It is in that silence that a truth can sometimes whisper, a truth about who you are, why you suffer, and where your power truly lies. This is not a story about a miracle worker, though miracles seemed to follow him. This is not the tale of a prophet, though he spoke of divine principles. This is the story of a detective, a spiritual detective, who, in the bustling, believing, and often suffering America of the 19th century, cracked what he believed was the fundamental code of human existence. He was a clockmaker by trade, and he believed he had found the key to the human mechanism. His name was Phineas Quimby. Bide, the code, the key, the science he devoted his life to, was the science of health and happiness. He also called it, with profound intentionality, the science of Christ. To understand the magnitude of his discovery, we must first feel the world into which he was born. Close your eyes and picture it. America, the 1840s. The air is thick with the smoke of industry and the fervor of belief. It is a nation physically expanding westward at a brutal pace, and spiritually convulsing with what historians would call the Second Great Awakening. Intent revivals and cramped chapels, fiery preachers paint vivid pictures of a God of justice and wrath. Sin is a palpable force, and hell is not a metaphor, but a looming, eternal reality. To be sick, to be poor, to suffer misfortune, these are often seen not as random events, but as evidence of divine displeasure, a moral failing, a sign of a soul out of alignment with a punitive God. And if you turned from the preacher to the physician, what solace was there? The world of medicine was a landscape of grim empiricism and often horrific guesswork. The dominant theory was allopathy, the idea that disease was an invasive entity that must be driven out by violent countermeasures. The tools of the trade, bloodletting, to drain the corrupt humors, blistering agents, to raise great painful boils on the skin, drawing out the sickness, calomel, a mercury chloride compound, given as a purgative, which often led to mercury poisoning, robbing patients of their teeth and sanity. Treatment was a battle, and the patient's body was the battlefield, often left scarred and broken by its supposed defenders. Into this world where spiritual terror and physical torment were two sides of the same dark coin walked Phineas Quimby, a man of delicate health himself, perpetually curious, trained in the precise, lawful world of gears and pendulums. Peeve as a seeker, unsatisfied with the explanations given for suffering. His quest began, ironically, with what most considered superstition, mesmerism, or animal magnetism. The idea, pioneered by Franz Anton Mesmer, was that an invisible, universal fluid connected all living things, and that imbalances in this fluid caused disease. A mesmerist, through passes of their hands, could redistribute this fluid and effect cures. Quimby was fascinated. He attended lectures by a French mesmerist named Charles Poyon, and became a proficient practitioner. He even took on a young man named Lucius Berkmer as a subject. In trance, Lucius would diagnose illnesses and prescribe remedies for people in the audience, and they got better. Quimby, the clockmaker, observed. He was not content with the spectacle. He needed to understand the mechanism, and here, in a quiet revelation that would change the course of his life and ripple out to affect millions, he saw the truth. It wasn't the magnetic fluid. It wasn't Lucius's supernatural sight. Quimby realized that Lucius, in his sensitive trance state, was simply tuning into the beliefs of the people around him. He was reading their expectations, their fears, their own ideas about what was wrong with them and what might fix it. The diagnosis and cure came from the collective mind of the audience, not from an invisible ether. This was the pivotal insight. The power was in belief. The mind was the primary actor. Quimby made a decisive break. He left public mesmerism behind. He had seen behind the curtain. The healer wasn't manipulating a fluid. He was engaging with an idea. And if false ideas could make people sick, could true ideas make them well? He moved to Portland, Maine, and opened an office. He was now a mental practitioner. Sick and desperate came to him people with consumptions, rheumatism, tumors, neuralgia, conditions deemed hopeless by the doctors of their day. And Quimby would sit with them. He would talk. He would listen with an intensity that was itself a form of diagnosis. He wasn't listening for lung sounds. He was listening for the sound of error. This is the core of Quimby's science. He divided all of human experience into two kingdoms, the kingdom of truth and the kingdom of error. Truth was spiritual, eternal, and real. It was the substance of divine wisdom, which he identified as God, or the Christ principle. Error was everything else. All the opinions, theories, superstitions, fears, and false beliefs that the world, including religion, medicine, and society, had implanted in the human mind. Error, to Quimby, was not just a mistake. It was a living, active force of oppression. It was a false mind, a parasitic consciousness that had taken up residence within a person's own thinking. His view of the human being was elegantly dualistic, but not in the traditional religious sense of soul versus body. For Quimby, it was spiritual mind versus mortal mind. Your spiritual mind is your true identity, a particle of the divine wisdom, inherently healthy, happy, and free. It is the Christ within, but it is shrouded, like the sun behind storm clouds, by the mortal mind. The mortal mind is the accumulation of error. It is the mind of the flesh, of the senses, of received opinion. It is the mind that believes the preacher's angry God, the doctor's dire prognosis, the world's verdict of unworthiness. And here is the critical, revolutionary link. The mortal mind manufactures the body. Quimby did not see the body as a separate, mechanical entity. He saw it as the perfect, passive, and loyal servant of the mind that believes in it. If the mortal mind believes in weakness, the body manifests weakness. If it believes in the power of a germ or a hereditary disease, the body obediently produces the symptoms. If it is filled with the sorrow of loss or the acid of resentment, the body finds a way to express that emotion as physical pain, a pain in the heart, a tightening in the chest, an ache in the joints. The body, in Quimby's view, has no independent intelligence. It is clay, waiting to be shaped by the potter of belief. Disease, therefore, is never primarily physical. It is always, in its origin, mental. It is the body faithfully acting out a script written by the error-ridden mortal mind. So, how did he cure? Not with prayer in the supplicating sense, not with medicine, not with manipulation. He cured with explanation. His method was a form of spiritual Socratic dialogue. He would engage the patient's error directly. Imagine a woman, bedridden with what was called spinal disease, filled with pain and the certainty of her incurability. Quimby would pull a chair to her bedside. His demeanor was not that of a mystical healer, but of a kind, confident teacher. "Where is your pain?" he might ask. "In my lower back," she'd reply. "The doctor says it's an inflammation of the nerves." "I see," Quimby would say calmly. "And what does that mean to you, this inflammation?" "It means I am broken. I cannot rise. I am a burden." "That is a belief," Quimby would state, not unkindly. "A very heavy belief you have consented to. But let me ask you this. Before you ever felt this pain, did you experience a great fear, a profound grief, perhaps, a burden of another kind?" He would guide her patiently to connect the physical sensation to the mental or emotional event. Often he would find it a traumatic loss, a financial ruin, a religious terror. He would then explain, in simple, clear terms, the true nature of reality as he saw it. He would explain that God, the divine wisdom, is pure love and intelligence, and could not create sickness to punish or teach. Sickness was not of God. It was of error. He would explain that her true self was not this suffering, mortal body, but the spiritual mind within, which was whole and perfect. He was, piece by piece, dismantling the architecture of her error. He would challenge the doctor's opinion not as a man, but as an erroneous idea. "The doctor told you a story about nerves," he might say. "Your mind believed that story. Your body, listening to your mind, began to perform that story. I am here to tell you a truer story, the story of your health, which has been here all along, waiting for you to remember it." The moment of healing, what he called the Christ revelation, was not an emotional frenzy. It was often a quiet, profound click of understanding. It was the patient, for the first time, seeing the chain of causation. "My grief became my pain. The doctor's words became my prison. This is not me. This is a belief I have been wearing." In that moment of recognition, the mortal mind's grip would loosen. The spiritual mind, the truth, would shine through. And the body, that ever-obedient servant, having received new instructions from its true master, would have to change. The pain would dissolve. Strength would return. The inflammation would vanish, because the idea that powered it had been withdrawn. Quimby called this process the truth setting you free. It was clinical in its cause and effect, yet spiritual in its substance. Now we must address the term he used with such precision, the science of Christ. For Quimby, this was not about founding a new Christianity. It was about reclaiming a lost science. He made a crucial distinction between Jesus and Christ. Jesus of Nazareth was, to Quimby, the greatest demonstrator who ever lived. He was a man who had so completely understood the divine principle, the Christ's, that he could manipulate the matter of error, sickness, sin, even death at will. He was the master practitioner of this science. But the Christ itself was not a person. It was the principle, the divine truth, the wisdom of God. It was the universal, impersonal law of harmony that Jesus understood and manifested. Quimby saw himself not as a new Jesus, but as a restorer of Jesus's true method. He argued that the Church had worshipped the man and lost the principle. They prayed to Jesus instead of understanding and applying the Christ science as Jesus did. Quimby's work was an attempt to demystify the gospel miracles. Healing the leper was not magic. It was the application of a higher truth health to correct a lower error disease. Raising Lazarus was not a suspension of natural law. It was the operation of a higher natural law, law of life over the belief in death. He was fiercely anti-clerical in this sense. We saw organized religion, with its doctrines of inherent sinfulness and eternal punishment, as one of the greatest manufacturers of error, creating the very diseases it then promised to solace. His mission was to liberate people from what he called priestcraft, the use of spiritual authority to instill fear and dependency. Quimby died in 1866, leaving behind a mountain of handwritten manuscripts, letters, essays, fragments of his thoughts. He founded no church, wrote no definitive book, but a seed does not need a monument to grow. His ideas were carried into the world by the people he healed, and two figures, in particular, would take this seed and plant forests that still stand today. The first was Mary Baker Eddy, a woman of immense intellectual power and personal suffering. She came to Quimby in 1862, crippled and in pain. Under his care, she walked again and was electrified by his ideas. After his death, following her own period of crisis and what she described as a divine revelation, she systematized Quimby's core concepts into a rigid, doctrinal structure. Christian Science. She gave it a textbook, Science and Health, with key to the Scriptures, a centralized church, and a clear theological framework, while she publicly minimized Quimby's influence to establish her own divine authority. The genetic code of his thought disease as mental error. Treatment through spiritual understandings, undeniably the foundation of her work. The second path was through students like Warren Felt Evans, a former Methodist minister healed by Quimby. Evans blended Quimby's mental healing principles with the mysticism of Emanuel Swedenborg and Eastern thought, writing a series of influential books. This stream became known as the New Thought movement. New Thought was less doctrinaire than Christian Science, more focused on the practical application of right thinking for health, prosperity, and personal power. From New Thought sprouted religious science, unity, and the entire modern positive thinking and law of attraction philosophy. When you hear phrases like "your thoughts create your reality" or "change your mind, change your life," you are hearing a distant, secularized echo of Phineas Quimby's clockmaker logic. So, what is Quimby's legacy for us, here, now, in the 21st century? Is he merely a historical footnote, the originator of ideas that have since been commercialized or dogmatized. I would argue his relevance is more profound than ever. We live in an age that is finally, scientifically, beginning to validate his central premise. Psychoneuroimmunology maps the intricate pathways by which stress, a mental, emotional state, weakens the immune system. The placebo and nocebo effects are powerful. Documented proof that belief can trigger measurable physiological healing or harm. Cognitive behavioral therapy is based on the idea that by identifying and correcting distorted thinking error, we can alleviate mental and even physical suffering. Mindfulness and meditation are practices aimed at quieting the mortal mind of chatter and fear, to connect with a calmer, truer state of being. Quimby was a pioneer of what we might now call consciousness-based healing. He was the bridge between the supernatural and the psychological. He took the concept of demon possession and reinterpreted it as error, possession. He took the concept of faith healing and demystified it into understanding healing. But beyond the therapeutic techniques, Quimby offers a radical philosophical challenge. He asks us to perform a ruthless audit of our own minds. What beliefs have we unknowingly consented to? What diagnoses about our health, our capabilities, our worth, our very nature have we absorbed from the culture, from our past, from authority figures, and accepted as unshakable truth? Are we living from our spiritual mind, our core of wisdom and peace, or are we puppets of a mortal mind programmed by 1,000 old hurts and borrowed opinions? His science of health and happiness is ultimately an invitation to sovereignty. It is the assertion that you are not a victim of random cells, cruel fate, or a capricious God. You are, at your essence, a being of spirit, operating in a universe of intelligent law. Your suffering is a signal, a signpost pointing to a place where you have mistaken a lie for the truth. And your freedom lies not in fighting the shadow on the wall, but in turning to face the light that casts it. Phineas Quimby, the clockmaker from Maine, believed he had found the master key to the human condition. It was not a pill, nor a prayer, nor a creed. It was self-knowledge. It was the courage to question every pain, every limitation, and to ask, is this me? Or is this a story I have been told? A story I have come to believe? In the quiet of his consulting room, in the clarity of his explanations, he offered people something priceless, the return to themselves. And that, perhaps, is the most profound science and the greatest happiness of all.